Welcome back, guys. I'm going to do another primer video, how to get you kind of rolling into, or really out of your native 3D application and into Zbrush and sculpting on objects that you may be blocking out for detailing in Zbrush. So I'm going to tab over to Max. This is targeted at beginners. It's kind of on importing and exporting out of Zbrush. I'm actually gonna create just a box, create a simple box, and we're gonna create a few objects here. Let's do save as. No, I'm sorry. How we're gonna get this out of Max is to go File, Export, Selected. Go to my desktop, not sort. I'm going to go to Exports, and I'm going to call this Box Basic. And Zbrush does not understand FBX files. That's okay. We can go to OBJ, save a Box Basic OBJ. I tend to leave things set to polygons. This is for, really just me. I don't know why all of this isn't checked. It usually is. Yes, there might even be, look at that, there's even a ZBrush preset I could set it to, but I don't want to bring those materials. So I'm just going to leave it like that, and I know I don't need texture coordinates, so let's go ahead and export my OBJ. And I'm going to do another one here with the same box. I'm going to say effect pivot only. I'm going to center to object, and I'm going to take this same box and I'm just going to center it to the world. And I'm going to save, I'm going to do export selected. Say box centered, polygons, no materials, export. And done with that. I'm also going to create a cylinder. Export selected for that. Call this no cap. Polygons, export. Kind of doing this to illustrate a point. I'm going to do cap segments to 2. Export selected. Cylinder. Cap. Export. Also, I'm going to create a sphere. And this one I'm gonna do offset. I think I'm even gonna leave it. I think we can just leave this pivot point alone. I'm gonna double checking. So export. Call this sphere offset. And then lastly, I'm going to create what's called a quad sphere. So I'm just inserting a couple of connects. Going to subdivide this. once. I'm going to collapse that subdivision. Well, I'm going to keep it. And then I'm going to put a spherify. And then one more on there. Fascinating. Mesh smooth would do that. Okay, there we go. And I'm going to effect pivot, center to object, center to the world, export selected, quad sphere. Polygon, doesn't matter. Export, all OBJs. And so I'm going to jump back into ZBrush. I'm going to show you some of the differences between these objects. And I think first things first, we're just going to, let's double the canvas. And then get rid of that range. And under the tool menu, I'm going to say import. I'm going to go to desktop, primer, exports, make a list. And let's see, box, basic. Really the first thing I want to talk about is this cylinder. Well, let's go ahead and open up the box basic. Yeah, never mind. Oof, there we go. So I just went tool import and imported this box. You can hit Shift F on your keyboard to turn on wireframe. You can see that there really is only the basic box in here, and there's really no perspective either. You hit P on your keyboard, jump into perspective mode, and this is where you could start to subdivide up. Subdivide your mesh. Control D. Then I can step up and down. Shift D and D. We are going to talk about appending objects, and so I could. It's kind of weird how you get objects into each other. So I could do this a couple of ways to kind of. Well, let's just do this. Import. I'm going to load in another box centered and open. And you can see that my smoothed box actually, it went away completely. How funny. It's about what I expected too. So I had already subdivided that mesh. You can sculpt on a little bit. Right? Something like that. And then when I go import, and I import a different box, it completely gets rid of my previous box. Overwrote that that current subtool, and that's what's kind of weird about getting objects into ZBrush, is that whenever we import OBJs, you're importing onto a subtool, and that's important to note, because if you want to layer in other objects in here, you have to either go to star, so I load up a new object, right, and I'm replacing that star subtool, import, centered, and you can see now I got the box basic and the box. So we replace primitive assets, and it's kind of this idea of I guess starting with a ZBrush container and then importing into that ZBrush container. And so that may be like a ZBrush primitive, right? So like a sphere, and then I import and do maybe like a cylinder cap, and then that replaced those objects for me. It imports it. Just make sure that you're not importing over your original object. To import into another subtool, what we would do is we would say append. You see I have the subtool menu open. I'm going to go append. I tend to just append a star. You have to make sure that you highlight it because it's the one that we're going to replace. You see the star actually is in here. It's in there. And then I'm going to say, remember, highlight that subtool, import. And let's do maybe the sphere offset. And there's my sphere offset, right? And it's actually appended underneath that subtool. Or I'm sorry, under this tool as a subtool. After it's been imported, I could just append another one, and because it's the currently selected subtool, when I append, I'm just going to append that currently selected subtool again. So there's now two of them in here. Can't really tell, but I could mirror this. That's what we're going to do. Where would I do that? Deformation. And I could mirror on the wrong axis. Boom. Still didn't do it. Boom. Z-axis. Mirrored across. Another important thing to note is that if I were to try to import this cylinder no cap that we made earlier, let's do it on a new star, by the way, import cylinder no cap. Now, because we had an n-gon on that, it's going to ask us, this mesh contains non-standard polygons, more than 4 sides, n-gons. Would you like to split these polygons into sets of symmetrical triangles or to a combination of quads and triangles? And I'd be willing to bet that usually, I mean, Zbrush doesn't like working with triangles that much. I say that, but just in terms of importing, if we do, let's try quads and triangles, and you can see how it handled our, handled that import. There are actually holes in this mesh, and so I go to subdivide that, and it's just garbage. Alright, so let's go import again, cylinder no cap, symmetrical triangles. And funny enough, it actually worked. It didn't always work, but it created a point for us. That was kind of nice. So just something to note, it's usually best to stay away from n-gons and dealing with, to not really let Zbrush deal with your n-gons, for you to actually take care of them inside of your native application. And then we could go import cylinder cap, kind of like that. Just less hassle, and notice we don't get that little error that pops up asking us how we want to divide up our n-gons. If I were to take a look at this sphere again, one of the last things on importing I kind of want to talk about. I'll subdivide this up. But when we sculpt on something with triangles, I mean, even just subdividing, you can see what that did to this mesh, right? And as we sculpt on it, we tend to get this stretching, which is kind of a pain to deal with. I mean, for an eye, say if we're going to create an eye, that's kind of cool, but not really, and that's something that you usually don't want to deal with. Just kind of noticing how subdividing triangles inside of Zbrush can create more problems and be difficult to sculpt over, really. So, that being said, That's actually why I created the quad sphere. So, I mean, don't feel you're trapped into using that typical sphere. There are other ways to handle dealing with spheres, and this one isn't the best quad sphere. It's still a little warped in areas. But notice that we're not going to get any of those kind of nasty pinching, except for maybe on the corners of that pole. Get a little bit there, but just not as bad as it was. Was asking me if I wanted to try and transfer the details of the sphere to the the box, and it's because I was importing over that sphere offset, and you can see it actually replaced, and it named my box sphere offset. So let's talk about kind of one more ZBrush thing to get you off and going. Masking. So holding control. Oh, that's interesting. That's kind of new. Weird. You see, even JJ's learning things. Okay, I've been in ZBrush a while, and then just kind of doing things that are, you know, this is a newer ZBrush for me. Control is drag. That's how you drag out a mask. Masks will kind of freeze geometry for you. So if I go to paint or sculpt, it won't allow me to edit that geometry. Right. And that was just through control dragging a box around polygons. If I control drag out in the open canvas and I don't drag over anything, it'll actually clear my mask. That's important. Clear your mask. If I hold control and I drag and then I hold alt, it'll actually subtract a mask. And all of that's from dragging off of the mesh, creating these boxes. Clear that, control drag. You can also control paint polygons. You can paint your mask. Another way to mask things. And can't forget about hiding objects. And not only can we mask, yeah, my undo history, not only can we mask, but we can hide objects. So if I'm doing a control shift drag, that's going to isolate my selection based off of what I selected. Control shift drag in the viewport is inverting. Control shift click is how I unhide all. So I can control shift drag to say I want to look at these, and then I can just control shift click to unhide all, or undo, and I can control shift drag to invert. And that was something I actually forgot to mention about the mask, is if I control drag mask and I just control click in the viewport, I can invert my mask. And if I control click on the object, it'll blur my mask. A couple little extra things. ZBrush is pretty intuitive when it comes to these masking things, and that was what I was noticing a moment ago. Is I was doing a control drag with my mask, and then I tapped control again, and it actually turns it into a mask feature. didn't used to do that. That's pretty interesting. That's something I just learned while making this video for you guys. So I can isolate these. Oh. You can also Control Shift drag and hold Alt to hide instead of isolate, because the green box is the isolate. The red box, Control Shift drag and then hold Alt, is to hide. And then Control Shift click in the open to unhide, or Control Shift drag to invert. You see how this can become, I don't know, you move around pretty fast like this in inside of ZBrush. Kind of makes you wish 3ds Max had things like this. It's good for little things like this. Like I tend to like to work on, like if I have a character and he's got eyes, right? I like to use this masking. Kind of works like Photoshop. If you hold spacebar while you're doing this, you can slide it. See, this can be helpful for getting in and working. Kind of isolated areas like that. Also note that when I hold Control Shift, my tools over here are changing. So I could change my drag method. See, if I do Control Shift, it's usually a box. I could change my method if I'm holding Control Shift, go over here, change it to lasso. And this is another good one too, so I can make a lasso selection. Change that to a circle. And that's kind of importing into ZBrush from out of Max using OBJs, and then masking, and then hiding and unhiding. Thanks for watching.